My mother texted me that she'd been shot. An hour later, she told me she was lying. Then she blamed me for believing her. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I'm 18 years old. I've been in therapy for exactly 3 months, and until last Thursday, I still believed that despite everything, despite the yelling, the manipulation, the constant emotional warfare, my mothers loved me. I believed that when it really mattered, when life and death hung in the balance, they would choose me over their need to be right, their need to control, their need to punish me for not performing grief in the exact way they demanded. I was wrong. It's been 4 days since I blocked both of my mother's phone numbers, and I still can't sleep through the night. I keep waking up at 2 a.m., my heart racing, checking my phone for messages that can't come through anymore, messages that would probably just hurt me anyway. My roommate found me crying in the bathroom yesterday, and when he asked what was wrong, I didn't know where to start. How do you explain that your mother lied about being shot just to test whether you loved her enough? How do you make someone understand that the people who raised you, who were supposed to protect you, deliberately caused you the worst emotional pain imaginable and then blamed you for having the wrong reaction to their cruelty? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, at the moment when everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was sitting in my dorm room trying to process what had just happened in therapy. My therapist and I had spent the last hour dissecting my relationship with my mother. Mother one, the one who gave birth to me, the one whose voice has been the soundtrack to my anxiety for as long as I can remember. We'd been working through specific memories, specific moments when her words had carved themselves into my psyche and set up permanent residence there. It wasn't easy work. Therapy never is, especially when you're just starting college and trying to figure out who you are, separate from the person your parents trained you to be. I was 18 and exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from trying to build a life while the foundation keeps shifting beneath your feet. I was navigating financial aid forms that my mother's had promised to help with but hadn't. I was trying to figure out which clubs to join, which medications were actually helping versus just making me feel numb, how to study for college exams that were nothing like high school tests. I was doing all of this alone, despite their promises that they'd be there, that they'd help me transition, that college would be different from the constant criticism and control that had defined my childhood. They lied about that too, but I didn't know it yet. My phone buzzed. A text from Mother One. Did I tell you about a crazed gunman from Florida chasing me on the highway in a car? I stared at the message for a moment, my therapy-raw brain trying to process the absurdity of it. My mother had a tendency toward drama, toward exaggeration, toward turning minor inconveniences into epic narratives where she was always the victim or the hero. A crazed gunman sounded exactly like the kind of story she'd invent to get attention, to make her day sound more interesting than it was, to compete with whatever I might be going through. So I responded the way I'd learned to respond to her dramatic proclamations, with humor, with deflection, with the kind of casual dismissal that said I wasn't going to feed into whatever narrative she was constructing. Nope, but sounds about right, I typed back. I thought I was calling her bluff. I thought I was refusing to play her game. I thought I was protecting myself from getting sucked into another one of her attention-seeking spirals. I had no idea I was walking into a trap. I put my phone down and started getting ready for work. I had a shift starting at 2 p.m. at the campus bookstore, a job I desperately needed because my mother's financial support was sporadic at best, conditional at worst, and I was trying to build some independence, some cushion against the inevitable moment when they'd use money as a weapon against me again. I was pulling on my work shirt when my phone buzzed again. 12:54 p.m., 6 minutes before I needed to leave for my shift. The message was long, detailed, horrifying. He shot at me and shattered the passenger window of the Miata. I floored it through the red light onto the highway and was hauling ass. Then I got a burning sharp pain above my bicep and realized I was bleeding. I went straight to the police. They called an ambulance and took my statement. The ER removed a .22 slug and some shards of glass from my right shoulder. The world tilted. My mother had been shot. My mother was in the emergency room. My mother had a bullet removed from her shoulder. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't an exaggeration. This was real. And I had responded to her first message with casual dismissal, with humor, with exactly the wrong tone for someone whose mother had just survived a shooting. The guilt hit me first, sharp and immediate. I'd failed her. I'd been so caught up in my own problems, so defensive against her usual manipulation, that I'd missed the one time she actually needed me to take her seriously. I was a terrible son. I was selfish. I was exactly the kind of person she'd always accused me of being when she was angry. But underneath the guilt was something else. Fear. Raw, primal fear that my mother might die, that I might lose her before I could apologize for not caring enough, before I could prove that I did love her despite everything, despite the therapy sessions where I was learning to name what she'd done to me as abuse. I responded the way I always respond when I'm overwhelmed, with inappropriate humor, with deflection, with anything to keep the terror at bay. Sick, great story to tell, I typed, my hands shaking. Then, immediately, or how about don't get shot. But even as I sent those messages, the reality was sinking in. My mother had been shot. This wasn't funny. This wasn't something to joke about. A minute passed, then another, and she didn't respond. The silence felt like confirmation that I'd failed, that I'd hurt her when she needed support, that I was as bad as she'd always said I was. I started typing frantically. How are you feeling? Did it shatter any bones? I love you. Each message sent a minute or two apart, each one more desperate than the last, each one trying to make up for my initial response, trying to prove that I cared, that I was a good son, that I deserved to have a mother who survived being shot. Still no response. The silence stretched out, filling my dorm room with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. I kept checking my phone, refreshing the conversation, willing her to respond, to tell me she was okay, to forgive me for not reacting the right way immediately. Finally, she responded. We started talking about what had happened, the chase, the shooting, the hospital. I was asking questions, trying to understand, trying to piece together how this could have happened. I texted Mother 2, my other mother, asking why she hadn't told me, why I had to find out like this. The messages showed as read, but she didn't respond. That silence felt ominous too, like everyone was mad at me, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. This conversation went on for almost an hour. An hour of me trying to be supportive, trying to ask the right questions, trying to perform the role of concerned son in exactly the way they needed me to. An hour of my shift time ticking away, of me knowing I should call my boss but being too caught up in the crisis to think clearly. Finally, 3 minutes before my shift was supposed to start, I texted my boss, I can't come in today. My mother was shot. My boss, who's actually a decent human being, immediately told me to take all the time I needed, that family emergencies were more important than work, that I shouldn't worry about the shift. I thanked him and then walked outside to a bench near my dorm, and that's when I finally let myself fall apart. I cried, I sobbed. I called my best friend Raymond and tried to explain what had happened through gasping breaths and a throat that felt like it was closing up. I was having a full panic attack, my first one in months, and all I could think was that my mother had almost died, and my last words to her before the shooting could have been, sounds about right. Casual, dismissive, exactly the kind of thing that would haunt me forever if she'd actually died. At 2:08 p.m., 8 minutes after my shift was supposed to start, an hour and 14 minutes after she told me she'd been shot, my phone buzzed with a new message. I embellished the story, Son BC. I couldn't believe you didn't ask me about being chased down by a man in a big truck with a gun. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. 4 times before I understood what she was saying. 5 times before the reality crashed over me like a wave of ice water. She was lying. She hadn't been shot. There was no bullet, no shattered window, no emergency room, no ambulance. She'd made it all up. She'd deliberately told me she'd been shot. Let me spiral into panic and grief and guilt for over an hour. Let me call out of work. Let me have a complete emotional breakdown on a bench outside my dorm. And now she was telling me it was my fault for not reacting correctly to her initial message. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what I was reading. Why would you let me call out of work? I typed, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype it twice. Why would you let me have a mental breakdown because of this? Her response came quickly, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. Was that after you called Raymond? Read your own text to me. A very abnormal response, and honestly, I was just being a smart ass because I couldn't believe you wouldn't ask about it. Not my fault that you called out of work. Why didn't you call me before you called Raymond if you were not concerned? I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of her logic. She was mad that I'd texted Raymond instead of calling her. She was blaming me for calling out of work after she'd told me she'd been shot. She was calling my response abnormal when I'd literally told her I loved her and asked if she was okay. And she'd been on the phone with Raymond's mother the whole time, watching me panic, watching me spiral, discussing my abnormal response while I was crying on a bench thinking my mother might die. The betrayal was so complete, so total, that I couldn't even feel it yet. I was numb, floating somewhere outside my body, watching this conversation happen to someone else. I never called Raymond, I typed. I texted him, and I told him I didn't know what to do because I need this money. I need every shift I can take, but I was really trying hard not to panic and let the emotions get to me. I was furious. I was heartbroken. Every bit of trust I'd ever had in her was disintegrating in real time. She knew what I'd been going through. She knew I was struggling financially. She knew I was in therapy trying to process the damage she'd done to me over 18 years of manipulation and emotional abuse. And she'd used all of that knowledge to hurt me in the most calculated way possible. I kept asking her why. Why would she do this? Why would she lie about something so serious? Why would she let me suffer when she could have stopped it at any moment? Finally, she responded, most people would have called their mom. Not a friend. That's what this was about. That's what all of this had been about. She was punishing me for not performing grief correctly, for not centering her in my panic, for reaching out to my friend instead of calling her immediately. She'd lied about being shot to teach me a lesson about priorities, about who should matter most, about how I was supposed to react when she claimed to be in crisis. Most mothers wouldn't lie to their son about getting shot, I typed back. Then I blocked her number. My hands were still shaking as I blocked Mother 2's number 2, because minutes after I'd blocked Mother 1, Mother 2 texted me with her own version of the story. She was being a smartass because she was in a traumatic event and you didn't act like you cared. It was very scary for her to have a gun pointed at her. It was dark humor, but she was actually seeing if you paid attention to what she actually said. Your response was sick. Great story to tell. This has been blown way out of proportion. Dark humor. They were calling this dark humor. They were acting like I was overreacting, like being lied to about a shooting was just a joke that I didn't get. Like my panic and grief and terror were unreasonable responses to being told my mother had a bullet removed from her shoulder. And mother, too, had known. She'd read all my messages asking why she hadn't told me, and she'd said nothing. She'd let me panic. She'd let me call out of work. She'd let me have a complete breakdown. And according to my aunt, who I called later, Mother 1 had explicitly told Mother 2 that she was going to play this prank on me. A prank, that's what they were calling it. A prank. I blocked Mother 2's number and sat in my dorm room, emotionally exhausted but knowing I couldn't stop yet. Because if I didn't reach out to my family immediately, if I didn't get my version of the story out first, my mothers would twist the narrative. They'd make me the villain. They'd tell everyone that I'd overreacted, that I was being dramatic, that I was punishing them for a harmless joke. So I spent the rest of that Thursday sending screenshots to my aunt, my uncle, my cousins, anyone in the family who might listen. I called them and explained what had happened, my voice still shaky, my throat still raw from crying. I needed them to see the truth before my mothers could bury it under their version of events. Everyone sided with me. Even my roommate, who barely knew my family, was horrified when I told him what had happened. But I had to make sure. I had to document everything, send evidence, create a record that couldn't be disputed or rewritten. The next day, my aunt called me. Mother 1 was mad at me, she said. Mother 1 was trying to convince the family that this was my fault, that I'd blown everything out of proportion, that I was being ungrateful and disrespectful. My aunt told me it wasn't my fault. She told me what my mothers had done was wrong, cruel, unforgivable. But the fact that Mother 1 was still trying to make me the villain, still trying to twist the story even after being caught in such an obvious, documented lie, that broke something in me that I don't think can be fixed. The day after the incident, I felt physically sick. I couldn't go to work. I'd already missed Thursday's shift because of the shooting, and now I was missing Friday's shift because my body had finally caught up with the emotional trauma and shut down. 2 days of work, about $100 in lost wages that I desperately needed, gone because my mother wanted to teach me a lesson about not caring enough. Now it's been 4 days. 4 days since I blocked their numbers. 4 days since I've spoken to either of my mothers. They're still paying for my phone line. That's the only financial support they're providing now. But I've already started researching what to do if they cut it off. I'm not going to be held hostage by a phone bill. I'm not going to let them use money to control me anymore. I know how this sounds. I know it seems ungrateful, seems harsh, seems like I'm overreacting to cut off my parents completely over one incident. They raised me, after all. They fed me and clothed me and kept a roof over my head for 18 years. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't that earn them some grace, some forgiveness, some benefit of the doubt? But here's what I'm learning in therapy. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Parents aren't supposed to deliberately cause their children pain just to prove a point. Families aren't supposed to weaponize trauma and then blame you for being traumatized. And this wasn't one incident. This was the culmination of 18 years of manipulation, of emotional abuse, of being told that my feelings were wrong, my reactions were abnormal, my needs were selfish. This was just the first time the cruelty was so obvious, so documented, so impossible to deny that even they couldn't gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. I'm sad because they're my parents. I'm sad because I still love them despite everything, despite knowing that love isn't enough to make them treat me with basic human decency. I'm sad because I wanted a family that felt safe, and instead I got a family that uses my vulnerabilities against me. But I'm also happier than I've been in months. The silence, the real silence, not the punishing silence my mother used to deploy when she was mad at me, is peaceful. I'm not walking on eggshells anymore. I'm not monitoring my every word and action to avoid triggering an explosion. I'm not responsible for managing their emotions or performing the role of grateful, obedient son. I'm just me. And for the first time in my life, that feels like enough. The first thing you need to understand about confronting an abuser is that it doesn't set you free. It just changes the shape of your cage. I learned this in the days following my confrontation with my father, when the initial adrenaline of speaking my truth wore off and I was left with the cold reality of what I'd done. I'd broken the fundamental rule of our family, the unspoken contract that had governed my entire life. We don't talk about what happens behind closed doors. We don't name the violence. We don't make the invisible visible. And now I was paying the price. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Something light, almost like hope. I'd done it. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding inside for 16 years. My father knew the truth. My mother knew the truth. My siblings knew the truth. Maybe, I thought in those first groggy moments of consciousness, maybe now things could change. Maybe now we could start to heal. Then I walked into the kitchen for breakfast and my father looked straight through me like I was made of glass. He was sitting at the table reading the newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. My mother was at the stove making eggs. It was a scene I'd witnessed thousands of times. A normal family morning, peaceful and domestic. Except when I said good morning, my father didn't respond. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge my existence in any way. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. Dad? I tried again, my voice smaller now, uncertain. Nothing. He turned a page of the newspaper, took a sip of his coffee, and continued reading as if I hadn't spoken. My mother glanced at me, her face tight with anxiety, and gave a tiny shake of her head. A warning. Don't push it, not now. I stood there in the doorway for a long moment, my heart starting to pound, that hopeful feeling in my chest curdling into something cold and sick. This was his response to my truth. Not anger, I could have handled anger. Not defensiveness or justification or even denial. Just erasure. As if by refusing to acknowledge me, he could make me and my accusations disappear. I grabbed a piece of bread and retreated to my room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I sat on my bed and tried to process what had just happened. This was a new tactic, one I hadn't experienced before. My father had punished me in many ways over the years, with violence, with threats, with withdrawal of financial support, but he'd never pretended I didn't exist. It was, I would come to understand, the cruelest punishment he could have devised. My mother came to my room an hour later. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of my bed, her hands folded in her lap in that way she had when she was about to say something I wouldn't want to hear. Your father is very upset, she began, her voice carefully neutral. I'm upset too, I said. He abused me for years. He almost drove me to suicide. And his response is to be upset that I told the truth about it? She flinched at the word suicide, like it was something obscene that shouldn't be spoken aloud. You have to understand this is very difficult for him. You accused him of terrible things in front of the whole family. They weren't accusations. They were facts. Things that actually happened. Things you witnessed. I know you're hurting, she said. And I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weariness of someone who'd been mediating between her husband's rage and her children's pain for decades. But you have to think about the family, about our reputation, about what people will say if this gets out. I don't care what people say, I told her, and I meant it. For the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't care about the neighbors' opinions or the relatives' gossip or the community's judgment. I care about the truth. I care about not pretending anymore. The truth, my mother said slowly, is complicated. Your father provided for this family. He worked hard to give you opportunities. He's not a perfect man, but he's not a monster either. He beat me, I said flatly. He dragged me by my hair and slammed my head against a wall. He whipped me with a belt when I was 11 years old. What would you call that if not monstrous? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He was under a lot of stress. He didn't know how to handle his emotions. It was wrong, yes, but... There is no but, I interrupted. There's no justification that makes it okay. And the fact that you're sitting here trying to defend him instead of protecting me tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie. She stood up, her face flushing with anger. I have protected you. I've kept this family together. I've made sacrifices you can't even imagine. And this is how you repay me? By tearing everything apart? I didn't tear anything apart, I said, my voice rising. He did. With every hit, every threat, every moment of terror he inflicted on us. I just finally named it. She left without another word, closing the door a little too hard behind her. I sat there in the silence of my room, feeling the walls closing in, understanding with terrible clarity that nothing was going to change. My father wasn't going to apologize. My mother wasn't going to leave him. My siblings weren't going to stage an intervention. I'd spoken my truth into a void, and the void had simply absorbed it and continued on as if nothing had happened. Except now I was invisible. The days that followed established a new pattern, a new normal that was somehow worse than the old one. My father continued to act as if I didn't exist. He would walk past me in the hallway without acknowledgement. He would sit at the dinner table and have conversations with everyone except me, his eyes sliding over me like I was a piece of furniture. When I tried to speak to him directly, he would either leave the room or simply continue whatever he was doing as if I hadn't said anything. My mother tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but even she started treating me differently. She was careful around me now, like I was something fragile and dangerous at the same time. She stopped asking me about my day, stopped including me in family discussions, stopped treating me like a full member of the household. My siblings were caught in the middle. My older half-brother, the one who defended me during the confrontation, tried to be supportive, but he had his own family to worry about and couldn't risk alienating our father completely. My younger brother avoided me, uncomfortable with the tension and unwilling to take sides. The others just pretended nothing had happened, which was its own form of betrayal. I started spending more and more time in my room, coming out only when necessary. I couldn't stand being in the common areas of the house, couldn't stand watching my father perform normalcy with everyone else while erasing me. The isolation was suffocating, but it felt safer than the alternative. A week after the confrontation, my mother came to my room again. This time she had my aunt with her, my father's sister, a woman who'd always been kind to me but who I knew would ultimately side with her brother. We need to talk about this situation, my aunt said, settling into the chair at my desk while my mother sat on the bed. This can't continue. The family is falling apart. The family fell apart a long time ago, I said. I just finally said it out loud, my aunt sighed. I know your father can be difficult. I grew up with him. I know he has a temper. But you have to understand this is how he was raised. His father was the same way. It's generational. That's not an excuse, I said. Trauma doesn't give you permission to traumatize others. He had a choice. He chose violence. He also chose to provide for you, my aunt countered. He chose to pay for your education, to give you opportunities he never had. Doesn't that count for something? I'd heard this argument before, this transactional view of parenting where providing material necessities somehow balanced out emotional and physical abuse. As if love could be measured in money spent. As if a roof over my head canceled out the fear I felt under that roof. No, I said simply. It doesn't. Basic provision is the bare minimum of parenting. It doesn't earn him the right to hurt me. My aunt and mother exchanged glances. Then my aunt leaned forward, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Your father is talking about cutting you off completely. No more financial support for your studies. No more living in this house. He's talking about disowning you officially. The threat hung in the air between us. This was the leverage they'd come to use, the final weapon in my father's arsenal. If I didn't apologize, if I didn't recant my accusations and restore the family's facade of normalcy, I would lose everything. Let him, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I'd rather be poor and honest than comfortable and complicit. My mother made a small sound of distress. You don't mean that. You're just angry. Once you calm down, I'm not going to calm down, I interrupted. I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth. And I'm not going to pretend anymore, just to make everyone else comfortable. My aunt stood up, her face hardening. You're being selfish. You're thinking only of yourself and not about what this is doing to the family. Your father is suffering. Your mother is suffering. We're all suffering because of your stubbornness. I'm suffering too, I said quietly. I've been suffering my entire life. But nobody cared about that until I made it visible. They left, and I knew they'd report back to my father that I was being unreasonable, that I was refusing to see sense, that I was the problem that needed to be fixed. The narrative was already being written, and in that narrative, I was the villain. The ungrateful daughter who'd turned on her loving father, who'd invented or exaggerated abuse to get attention, who was tearing the family apart with her selfishness. I needed to control the narrative before they did. That afternoon, I started making calls. I called my other aunt, my mother's sister, who lived in another city. I called my cousins. I called family friends who I thought might listen. And I told them everything, not the sanitized version my parents would tell, but the truth. The beatings, the threats, the suicide attempt, the confrontation, the silence. Some of them believed me immediately. Others were skeptical, asking questions that implied I might be exaggerating or misremembering. A few were openly hostile, telling me I was being disrespectful, that I should honor my parents regardless of what they'd done, that family problems should stay private. But I kept calling, kept telling my story, kept creating a record of the truth before my father could bury it under his version of events. I took screenshots of old text messages where my mother had acknowledged his temper, where my siblings had complained about his behavior. I wrote down dates and details of specific incidents while they were still fresh in my memory. I built a case, not for any legal proceeding, but for my own sanity, for proof that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful or making things up. My roommate, Chris, found me that evening surrounded by papers and notes, my laptop open to a document where I was typing out a timeline of abuse. He stood in the doorway of my room, taking in the scene, and I could see the concern on his face. Are you okay? He asked. No, I said honestly, but I'm doing what I need to do. He came in and sat on the floor next to me. What is all this? Evidence, I said. Documentation. My father is going to try to make me look like the bad guy, and I need to have proof that I'm not making this up. Chris picked up one of the pages, reading the detailed account I'd written of the chair incident when I was 6. His face went pale. Jesus, this really happened? All of it happened, I said, and more that I haven't written down yet. He was quiet for a moment, then said, What are you going to do with all this? I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just need to know that the truth exists somewhere, documented and real, even if my family wants to pretend it doesn't. For what it's worth, Chris said. I believe you. And I think you're incredibly brave for speaking up. I started crying then, not from sadness, but from relief. Someone believed me. Someone saw the truth and didn't try to minimize it or explain it away or tell me I was overreacting. It was such a small thing, but in that moment, it felt like everything. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and text messages and family drama. My father's sister called other relatives and told them I was having some kind of mental breakdown, that I was making wild accusations because I was unstable. My mother called her friends and painted herself as the victim, the poor woman caught between her difficult husband and her ungrateful daughter. My father said nothing publicly, but I heard through my siblings that he was telling people I'd always been a problem child, always dramatic and attention-seeking, and this was just another example of my instability. But I had allies too. My half-brother, despite the risk to his own relationship with our father, backed up my story. He told relatives about incidents he'd witnessed, about the fear we'd all lived with, about the way our father's rage had shaped all of our lives. My mother's sister, who'd never liked my father, believed me immediately and started calling other family members to share my side of the story. The family was splitting into factions, those who believed me and those who believed my father, with a large group in the middle who just wanted the whole thing to go away so they could go back to pretending everything was fine. Through it all, my father maintained his silence toward me. Days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, and he still hadn't spoken a single word to me. He would sit at the dinner table and have animated conversations with my siblings about their lives, their work, their plans. He would laugh at jokes and offer advice and play the role of the engaged, caring father. But when I was in the room, it was like a switch flipped. His face would go blank. His eyes would look through me. The performance would stop. It was psychological torture, and he knew it. This wasn't passive-aggressive silence. This was active. Erasure. A deliberate campaign to make me feel like I didn't exist. Like I didn't matter. Like I could disappear and no one would notice or care. My mother tried one more time to get me to apologize. She came to my room late one night when the house was quiet and my father was asleep. "Please," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Please just say you're sorry. You don't have to mean it. Just say the words so we can move past this." "Move past it to what?" I asked. "To pretending it never happened? To going back to the way things were?" "To peace," she said. "To being a family again." "We were never a family," I told her. "We were hostages performing family for the outside world. And I'm done performing." She left crying, and I felt a twinge of guilt. Not for what I'd said, but for the pain it caused her. But I couldn't protect her feelings anymore. I couldn't sacrifice my truth to maintain her comfort. The financial consequences started the next day. My father stopped depositing money into my account. The car he'd bought for me, technically in his name, disappeared from the driveway. When I asked my mother about it, she said he'd sold it. My phone, which was on the family plan, was the only thing he didn't cut off, probably because doing so would require explaining to the phone company why, and that would mean admitting there was a problem. I was effectively cut off, still living in the house but no longer supported, no longer acknowledged, no longer part of the family in any meaningful way. I was a ghost haunting the place where I used to live. My studies suffered. I couldn't concentrate. In class, couldn't focus on assignments, couldn't bring myself to care about exams when my entire life was falling apart. My professors noticed the change in my performance, and a few reached out to ask if everything was okay. I didn't know how to explain, so I just said I was dealing with family issues and left it at that. I started having panic attacks. Real ones, not just anxiety, but full-body episodes where I couldn't breathe, where my heart raced so fast I thought it might explode, where I was convinced I was dying. They would hit at random times, in the middle of class, while I was trying to study, late at night when I couldn't sleep. I'd never had panic attacks before the suicide attempt, but now they were a regular occurrence. My body's way of processing trauma it couldn't contain anymore. I went back to therapy, but I couldn't afford to pay for it myself, and my father had canceled the insurance that had been covering it. The therapist saw me anyway, pro bono, because she was worried about me. We talked about the silence, about the isolation, about the way my father's erasure of me was a form of continued abuse. "He's trying to break you," she said during one session. "He's trying to make you so uncomfortable, so desperate, that you'll apologize just to make it stop. Don't let him win." But it was hard not to feel like he was winning. I was trapped in a house where I didn't exist, studying for a degree I might not be able to finish with no money and no clear path forward. The scholarship applications I'd submitted were still pending, and even if I got accepted, I didn't know how I'd afford the expenses that weren't covered. I felt like I was drowning in slow motion, and no one was throwing me a lifeline. 3 weeks after the confrontation, something shifted. I woke up one morning and realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry, furious actually. How dare he treat me this way? How dare he abuse me for years and then punish me for naming that abuse? How dare he make me feel like I was the problem when he was the one who'd broken every promise a parent makes to a child? The anger felt better than the sadness. It felt like power, like fuel, like something I could use to keep going when everything else told me to give up. I started making plans. Real plans, not just vague hopes about scholarships and escape. I researched women's shelters in the city, places I could go if my father made good on his threat to kick me out. I looked into student loans and work-study programs and any possible way to fund my education without his help. I reached out to friends and asked if I could crash on their couches if I needed to. I built a safety net, thin and fragile as it was, so I wouldn't be completely helpless if the worst happened. And I stopped trying to talk to my father. If he wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. I would pretend he didn't exist either. I would stop seeking his acknowledgement, stop hoping for his apology, stop waiting for him to suddenly become the father I'd always needed him to be. I would survive this. I would get through my degree. I would find a way out of this house and this family and this life that had been slowly killing me since I was 5 years old. And someday, When I was safe and stable and far away from here, maybe I would be able to look back on this time and understand it. Maybe I would be able to forgive, not him, but myself, for all the years I'd stayed silent, for all the ways I'd made myself smaller to accommodate his rage. But that day wasn't today. Today, I was just trying to survive the silence. The thing about living in a war zone is that eventually you stop flinching at the explosions. The constant state of alert becomes your new normal, and you learn to function in conditions that would have broken you weeks earlier. That's where I was a month after confronting my father. Not healed, not okay, but adapted to a reality that would have seemed impossible before. I'd become an expert at navigating the silence. I learned my father's schedule down to the minute so I could avoid being in the same room with him. He woke at 6 a.m., had breakfast at 6:30, left for work at 7:15. He came home at 6 p.m., had dinner at 7, watched television until 10, then went to bed. I structured my entire day around these rhythms, emerging from my room only when I knew he'd be absent or occupied. When unavoidable encounters happened, passing in the hallway, both reaching for something in the kitchen, I'd perfected the art of moving like a ghost. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. Just smooth, efficient movement that got me out of his presence as quickly as possible. If he could pretend I didn't exist, I could do the same to him. But the pretending took energy I didn't have to spare. I was running on fumes, financially, emotionally, physically. Without my father's support, I was trying to survive on the small amount of money I'd saved from a summer job, which was disappearing faster than I'd anticipated. Food, transportation, basic necessities, everything cost money I didn't have. I'd started skipping meals to make my funds last longer, telling myself I wasn't hungry when my stomach cramped with emptiness. My mother noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd started leaving food outside my door, plates covered with foil, still warm from the stove. At first, I was too proud to take them. This felt like charity, like accepting her complicity in my father's abuse. But hunger has a way of eroding pride, and eventually I started eating the food she left, hating myself a little more each time. She never mentioned it. We'd developed our own form of silent communication. Her leaving food, me taking it, both of us pretending it wasn't happening. It was the only kindness she could offer without betraying my father, and I took it even though it felt like accepting crumbs when I deserved a feast. My studies were suffering catastrophically. I'd missed multiple assignments, bombed 2 exams, and stopped attending one class entirely because the professor kept asking if I was okay, and I couldn't handle the concern in his voice. I was on track to fail the semester, which would jeopardize my scholarship eligibility and potentially derail my entire academic career. But I couldn't make myself care. What was the point of a degree if I was too broken to use it? What was the point of planning for a future when I could barely survive the present? The IELTS exam I'd mentioned, the one I was supposed to take to qualify for international scholarships, was approaching. It was scheduled for Saturday, just 3 days away, and I hadn't studied at all. I'd registered for it months ago, back when I still believed my parents would support my dreams of studying abroad, back when I thought I had a future that extended beyond this house and this silence and this slow suffocation. Now it felt pointless. Even if I passed, even if I got accepted to a program overseas, I had no way to pay for it. The application fees alone were more than I could afford, let alone visa costs, plane tickets, housing deposits. My father had made sure of that when he cut me off. But my half-brother had other ideas. He showed up at the house on Wednesday evening, 3 days before the exam. I heard him talking to my father in the living room. Their voices warm and friendly, the kind of easy conversation I would never have with my father again. I stayed in my room, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to remind my father of my existence and ruin whatever peace they'd found. Then there was a knock on my door. "It's me," my brother called. "Can I come in?" I opened the door and he slipped inside quickly, closing it behind him. He looked around my room, at the textbooks I hadn't opened in weeks, the clothes piled on the chair, the general disarray that reflected my mental state, and his face tightened with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't perform for me. I know what's happening here. I know what he's doing to you." The kindness in his voice almost broke me. I'd been holding myself together through sheer force of will, and compassion threatened to shatter that fragile control. "I'm surviving," I said, which was more honest. "That's all I can manage right now." He sat on my bed, and I noticed he was carrying a folder. "I want to talk to you about the IELTS exam. Are you still planning to take it?" I shrugged. "I don't know. What's the point? Even if I pass, I can't afford to go anywhere." "What if you could?" He opened the folder and pulled out some papers. "I've been doing research. There are full scholarships available, ones that cover everything, including living expenses. You just need to qualify academically and pass the language exam. I'm about to fail this semester," I said flatly. "My grades are tanking. No scholarship program is going to accept me. Not if you give up now," he agreed. "But if you can pull it together for the next few weeks, if you can salvage your grades and ace this exam, you'd have options. Real options to get out of here." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But hope felt dangerous, like something that would only hurt more when it was inevitably crushed. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Why are you helping me when it could damage your relationship with Dad?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because I should have helped you years ago. I saw what he was doing. We all saw it. And we did nothing because it was easier to look away, to tell ourselves it wasn't that bad, to protect ourselves instead of protecting you. I can't undo that. But I can help you now." He pulled out more papers, printouts of scholarship programs, application deadlines, requirements. "I've already started filling out some of these for you. I just need you to provide some information and write the essays. And I'm going to pay for your IELTS exam and the application fees." "I can't let you do that," I protested. "That's too much money." "It's already done," he interrupted. "I paid the exam fee this morning, and I've set aside money for at least 5 scholarship applications. You're going to take that exam on Saturday, and you're going to pass it, and you're going to get out of this house." I started crying then. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Relief and gratitude and grief all mixed together. Someone was fighting for me. Someone believed I deserved a future beyond this nightmare. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you." He hugged me, and I let myself lean into it, let myself accept comfort for the first time in weeks. When he left, I looked at the papers he'd given me and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. I had 3 days to prepare for the IELTS exam. 3 days to pull myself together enough to perform well on a test that could determine my entire future. It wasn't much time, but it was something. It was a goal, a purpose, a reason to keep going beyond simple survival. I started studying that night. My brain felt foggy from weeks of stress and poor nutrition, but I pushed through, reviewing grammar rules and vocabulary, practicing reading comprehension and essay writing. I set alarms to keep myself on schedule, forced myself to eat the food my mother left outside my door, tried to sleep even though nightmares kept waking me up. My father noticed the change in my routine, the light under my door late at night, the sound of me moving around at odd hours. I could feel his awareness of me even through the silence, could sense him registering that something had shifted. But he still didn't speak to me, still maintained the fiction that I didn't exist. Fine, let him pretend. I was done caring about his acknowledgement. Thursday passed in a blur of studying. I barely left my room except to use the bathroom and grab the food my mother left. I practiced writing essays about social issues and environmental problems and technological advancement, trying to organize my chaotic thoughts into coherent arguments. I listened to English podcasts to prepare for the listening section, read academic articles to prepare for reading comprehension. It felt good to focus on something concrete, something I could control. I couldn't control my father's silence or my mother's complicity or my family's dysfunction. But I could control how well I prepared for this exam. Friday morning, my mother knocked on my door. This was unusual. She usually just left food and disappeared. I opened it cautiously. "I know about the exam tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Your brother told me." I waited, unsure where this was going. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you," she continued, her voice soft. "For not giving up. For still trying to build a future even when everything is falling apart." "Are you proud enough to leave him?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. "Are you proud enough to choose me over him?" Her face crumpled. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," I interrupted. "He's abusing me right now. This silence, this erasure, it's abuse. And you're letting it happen. You're enabling it by staying. Where would I go?" she asked, and she sounded so tired, so defeated. "I'm 54 years old. I have no job, no money of my own, no skills that would let me support myself. I'm trapped too." I wanted to feel sympathy for her, but I couldn't. She'd had choices I didn't have. She could have left when we were children, could have protected us instead of protecting him. She'd chosen comfort over our safety, and now she wanted me to understand, to forgive, to absolve her of responsibility. "You're not trapped," I said. "You're just comfortable, and you're willing to sacrifice your children to maintain that comfort." She left without another word, and I went back to studying, pushing down the guilt that tried to surface. I couldn't afford to feel guilty for speaking the truth. I couldn't afford to protect her feelings when she'd never protected mine. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. I woke up at 5 a.m., my stomach churning with anxiety. The exam was at 9, and I needed to take 2 buses to get to the testing center. I got dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel competent and capable, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. My mother had left breakfast outside my door, eggs and toast and fruit, more food than usual. A peace offering maybe, or an apology she couldn't speak aloud. I ate it mechanically, forcing down each bite even though my nervous stomach protested. I was gathering my things, pencils, ID, the exam confirmation, when there was a knock on my door. My heart jumped. My father never knocked on my door, never came to my room, never acknowledged my existence in any direct way. But when I opened the door, it was my younger brother standing there. We hadn't spoken much since the confrontation. He'd been avoiding me, uncomfortable with the family drama, unwilling to take sides. "Good luck today," he said awkwardly, "on your exam." "Thanks," I said, surprised. "I know things are really messed up right now," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "And I know I haven't been supportive. But I want you to know that I believe you. About what happened. About what he did to us." "Us?" I repeated. He nodded, still not looking at me. He hit me too. Not as much as you, but enough. I learned to stay out of his way. To be invisible. And I'm sorry I didn't protect you. You were a kid too, I said. It wasn't your job to protect me. Maybe not, he said. But I could have at least acknowledged what was happening. I could have not made you feel so alone. He hugged me quickly, then left before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, processing this unexpected support, feeling some of the isolation I'd been carrying start to crack. I wasn't completely alone. I had my half-brother helping me with applications. I had my younger brother finally acknowledging the truth. I had my mother leaving food outside my door, even if she couldn't do more. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. The bus ride to the testing center was long and crowded. I stood pressed against other passengers, trying to review vocabulary in my head, trying to stay calm. When I finally arrived at the building where the exam was being held, I was sweating despite the cool morning air. The testing room was full of other nervous students, all of us hoping this exam would open doors to better futures. I found my assigned seat and tried to settle my racing heart. I could do this. I'd studied. I was prepared. This was my chance to prove that I was more than my father's abuse, more than my family's dysfunction, more than the broken girl crying on a bathroom floor with a bottle of pills. The exam began, and I lost myself in it. Reading passages about climate change and urban development, listening to lectures about historical events and scientific discoveries, writing essays about whether technology improves or harms human relationships, whether governments should fund arts programs, whether traditional values are still relevant in modern society. I wrote about truth and silence and the cost of speaking up. I wrote about families that look perfect from the outside but are rotting from within. I wrote about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone tells you to sacrifice for others. I wrote my truth in academic language, disguised as hypothetical arguments, and it felt like power. When the exam ended 4 hours later, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I'd done it. I'd shown up and performed and given myself a chance. Whether I'd passed well enough to qualify for scholarships remained to be seen, but I'd tried. I'd fought for my future instead of surrendering to my circumstances. I took the bus home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The silence waiting for me at home didn't seem quite as suffocating. My father's erasure of me didn't seem quite as devastating, because I was building something he couldn't touch, planning an escape he couldn't prevent. When I got home, the house was quiet. My father was in his study. My mother was in the kitchen. My brothers were out. I went to my room and collapsed, on my bed, letting the adrenaline drain away, letting myself feel the full weight of exhaustion. There was a knock on my door. My mother probably checking to see how the exam went. But when I opened it, my father was standing there. For the first time in a month, he was looking directly at me. His face was unreadable, not angry, not kind, just blank. We stared at each other for a long moment, and I waited for him to speak, to break the silence, to acknowledge my existence. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he turned and walked away without saying a word. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands shaking. What was that? What did it mean? Was he weakening? Was he about to apologize? Or was this just another form of torture, giving me hope and then crushing it? I didn't know. And I realized with sudden clarity that I didn't care. Whatever he did or didn't do, whatever he said or didn't say, it didn't matter anymore. I was building my own future, one that didn't depend on his approval or his support or his acknowledgement. I was finding my own way out, and nothing he could do would stop me. The results came back 2 weeks later. I'd passed the IELTS with a score high enough to qualify for every scholarship program my brother had researched. Band 8 overall. Not perfect, but strong enough to prove I could handle academic work in English, strong enough to open doors that had seemed permanently closed. My brother called me with the news, his voice crackling with excitement over the phone. You did it! I knew you could do it. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt numb, like the good news was happening to someone else, someone who still had the capacity for joy. That's great, I said flatly. What's next? Next, we start applying, he said. I've already drafted your personal statement. I just need you to review it and add your own voice. And we need to get your transcripts and recommendation letters together. Transcripts. That was going to be a problem. My grades from the current semester were disastrous. 2 failed exams, multiple missed assignments, 1 class I'd effectively abandoned. If scholarship committees saw those grades, they'd reject me immediately, IELTS score or not. I need to fix my grades first, I told him. I'm failing this semester. There was a pause on the other end of the line. How bad is it? Bad enough that I might not graduate on time. Bad enough that my GPA is tanking. Bad enough that no scholarship committee would touch me. Okay, he said, and I could hear him thinking, strategizing. How much time do you have before final exams? 3 weeks. Can you salvage it? If you ace the finals, submit all the missing work, can you pull your grades up enough to pass? I thought about it. 3 weeks to undo a semester's worth of academic neglect. 3 weeks to somehow find the focus and energy I'd been lacking for months. 3 weeks to prove I was more than my circumstances. I don't know, I admitted. But I have to try. You can do this, my brother said with a certainty I didn't feel. You just passed a major English proficiency exam while living in a war zone. You can handle some college finals. After we hung up, I sat on my bed and looked at the disaster that was my academic life. I'd stopped attending office hours, stopped asking for help, stopped engaging with my coursework in any meaningful way. I'd let my father's abuse, both past and present, consume me so completely that I'd forgotten I was supposed to be building a future. But I couldn't afford to forget anymore. This was my way out. This was my escape route. And I was going to fight for it with everything I had left. I started that afternoon. I emailed every professor whose class I was failing, explaining that I'd been dealing with a family emergency and asking if there was any way to make up missed work. I didn't go into details, didn't mention the abuse or the suicide attempt or the toxic silence I was living in. I just said family emergency and hoped they'd be understanding. Most of them were. One professor let me submit all my missing assignments for partial credit. Another agreed to let me retake the exam I'd failed. A third offered to meet with me during office hours to help me catch up on the material I'd missed. Only one professor was unsympathetic, telling me that personal problems weren't an excuse for academic failure and that I should have communicated earlier if I was struggling. I wanted to scream at him that I'd been too busy trying not to kill myself to worry about his stupid class, but I just thanked him for his time and accepted that I'd probably fail that course. 4 out of 5 wasn't bad. If I could pull off miracles in those 4 classes, I might be able to salvage my GPA enough to graduate and qualify for scholarships. I threw myself into studying with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. I woke up at 5 a.m. and studied until midnight, taking breaks only to eat the food my mother left outside my door and occasionally sleep. I reviewed entire semesters' worth of material, wrote papers I should have written months ago, prepared for exams that would determine my entire future. My father noticed the change. I could feel his awareness of me sharpening, could sense him paying attention to my late-night studying sessions and early morning routines. But he still didn't speak to me. The silence held thick and oppressive, a constant reminder of his presence and his power. I didn't care anymore. Or rather, I'd learned to function despite caring. The silence still hurt, still made me feel erased and invisible, but I'd stopped letting it paralyze me. I had a goal now, a concrete plan for escape. And nothing, not his silence, not my mother's complicity, not my own exhaustion, was going to stop me. 10 days before finals, something shifted in the house. I was studying in my room when I heard raised voices from downstairs. My parents were arguing, not unusual, but this sounded different. More intense, more desperate. I crept to my door and opened it slightly, trying to hear what they were saying. "Can't keep doing this," my mother was saying, her voice shrill with emotion. "You can't keep pretending she doesn't exist. She's your daughter. She stopped being my daughter when she accused me of being a monster," my father shot back. "When she tried to destroy this family's reputation with her lies. They weren't lies. I was there. I saw what you did to her, to all of them. Then why didn't you stop me?" my father demanded. "Why didn't you leave if it was so terrible? Why did you stay and let it happen?" There was a long silence. Then my mother said quietly, "Because I was afraid. Because I didn't know how to survive without you. Because I chose my own comfort over my children's safety, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." I'd never heard her admit that before. Never heard her take responsibility for her role in our family's dysfunction. It should have felt like vindication, but instead it just felt sad. "She's applying to study abroad," my mother continued. Her brother told me. "She's trying to leave, to build a life away from us. And when she's gone, when she's successful and happy somewhere far away from here, you're going to regret this. You're going to regret that your pride was more important than your daughter." "Let her go," my father said coldly. "Let her run away and pretend she's better than us. She'll fail. She'll come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, and then we'll see who has the power." I closed my door quietly and went back to my desk. So that's what he thought. That I'd fail. That I'd come back broken and desperate. That I'd apologize and submit and return to being the obedient daughter he could control. He was wrong. I studied harder. I pushed myself past exhaustion, past the point where the words on the page started blurring together, past the point where my body begged for rest. I would not fail. I would not give him the satisfaction of being right. Finals week arrived like a storm I'd been watching approach for weeks. 4 exams in 5 days, plus 2 major papers due. It was brutal, but I was ready. I'd prepared as well as I could given the circumstances, and now all I could do was execute. The first exam was statistics, the class where the professor had been unsympathetic to my situation. I walked into that exam knowing I was probably going to fail the course regardless of how well I did, but I took it anyway, answering every question to the best of my ability. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. The second exam was sociology. I'd always been good at this subject, good at analyzing social structures and power dynamics and the ways systems perpetuate inequality. I wrote an essay about family systems and abuse, about how silence enables violence, about how victims are often blamed for disrupting the peace when they speak their truth. The professor would probably think I was writing theoretically, academically, She wouldn't know I was writing my own story. The third exam was literature. We'd been studying narratives of resistance, stories about people who fought against oppressive systems. I wrote about the courage it takes to speak when silence is safer, about the cost of truth-telling, about how sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to disappear. Between exams, I worked on my papers. One was about economic inequality and social mobility. I wrote about how financial abuse traps people in toxic situations, how money becomes a weapon in the hands of those who control it. The other was about psychological trauma and resilience. I wrote about how people survive impossible circumstances, how they rebuild themselves after being broken. I was writing my truth in academic language, disguising my pain as scholarship, and it felt like alchemy, turning suffering into something useful, something that might actually help me escape. The fourth and final exam was psychology. The irony wasn't lost on me, taking an exam about mental health and human behavior while living in a situation that was actively destroying my mental health. I answered questions about trauma responses and coping mechanisms and the long-term effects of childhood abuse, and I wondered if the professor grading my exam would recognize that I wasn't just regurgitating textbook knowledge, I was describing my own life. When I walked out of that final exam, I felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. I'd done it. I'd survived finals week despite everything. Whether I'd done well enough to salvage my grades remained to be seen, but I'd shown up and fought and refused to let my circumstances defeat me. I went home and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, there was an envelope that had been slid under my door. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the outside. For your applications. Inside was cash. Not a lot, maybe enough to cover application fees for 2 or 3 scholarship programs, but more than I'd expected. There was a note too, written in my mother's careful script. I know this doesn't make up for anything. I know I failed you in ways I can never fix, but I want you to succeed. I want you to get out of here and build a life that doesn't include this pain. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. I'm sorry I chose wrong. I love you, even if I've never known how to show it properly. Mom. I sat on my bed holding that note, crying quietly. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was acknowledgement, however late, however insufficient. It was her finally choosing me, even if only in this small, secret way. I used the money to submit applications to 5 scholarship programs. My brother had helped me craft a personal statement that was honest without being too revealing, that explained my academic struggles without going into traumatic detail. I wrote about overcoming adversity, about resilience, about my commitment to using education as a tool for social change. I wrote about wanting to study psychology so I could help other people escape abusive situations. I wrote about wanting to understand trauma so I could heal from my own. I wrote about wanting to build a life dedicated to breaking cycles of violence and silence. I didn't mention my father specifically. I didn't need to. The truth was there between the lines for anyone who knew how to read it. Grades were posted 3 days after I submitted my applications. I logged into the student portal with my heart pounding, terrified of what I'd find. Statistics. D. I'd failed as expected, but at least I'd passed the exam itself. Sociology A. I'd aced the final, and the professor had given me credit for the essay that was basically my autobiography. Literature B+. Good enough. Psychology A. The professor had written a note on my final exam, exceptional insight. Have you considered graduate school? The class I'd abandoned, F, no surprise there. My GPA had taken a hit, but it wasn't catastrophic. I'd still graduate. I'd still qualify for most scholarship programs. I'd survived. I sent my final transcript to my brother, who forwarded it to the scholarship committees along with my applications. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Waiting was torture. Every day I checked my email obsessively, looking for responses from scholarship programs. Every day there was nothing, and every day I felt my hope eroding a little more. My father maintained his silence. 6 weeks now since he'd last spoken to me. 6 weeks of being invisible in my own home. 6 weeks of psychological warfare that was slowly grinding me down despite my best efforts to stay strong. I started having nightmares about being trapped. In the dreams, I was always trying to leave the house but couldn't find the door. Or I'd find the door but it would be locked. Or I'd get outside but realize I was still in the house, that the outside was just another room, that there was no escape. I'd wake up gasping, my heart racing, and it would take me several minutes to remember that the nightmares weren't real, that I was actually working toward escape, that I had a plan. But some days the plan felt as impossible as the nightmares. 2 weeks after submitting my applications, I got my first response. A rejection from a program in Canada. They thanked me for my interest but said they'd received many qualified applicants and couldn't offer me a spot. I tried not to let it devastate me. One rejection didn't mean anything. I still had 4 other applications pending. 3 days later, another rejection. This one from a program in the UK. Same polite language, same crushing disappointment. I started to panic. What if I didn't get any of the scholarships? What if I was stuck here forever, trapped in this house with a father who pretended I didn't exist, and a mother who loved me but not enough to save me? My brother called to check on me. Don't give up, he said. You only need one yes. Just one program to accept you and you're out. What if no one accepts me? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Then we'll find another way, he said firmly. There's always another way. You're not trapped, even if it feels like you are. But I felt trapped. I felt like the walls were closing in, like the silence was suffocating me, like I was drowning and no one was throwing me a lifeline. The third rejection came a week later. A program in Australia. I didn't even cry this time. I just stared at the email, feeling numb, feeling defeated, feeling like maybe my father was right. Maybe I would fail. Maybe I would end up crawling back to him. Maybe I was never meant to escape. I had 2 applications left. 2 chances. 2 possible futures that didn't include this house and this silence and this slow death of the spirit. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I begged the universe for just one break, just one opportunity, just one door to open when all the others had slammed shut. And then on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after finals ended, I got an email that changed everything. Dear applicant, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for a full scholarship to pursue your master's degree in clinical psychology at... I read it 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. A full scholarship. Everything covered. Tuition, housing, living expenses, even a small stipend for books and supplies. A program in Europe, far enough away that my father couldn't reach me, couldn't control me, couldn't hurt me anymore. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I was getting out. I ran to find my brother, forgetting for a moment that he didn't live in the house, that I'd have to call him. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed his number. I got in, I said when he answered. I got a full scholarship. I'm leaving. He whooped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I knew it. I knew you could do it. When do you leave? The program starts in 3 months, I said, reading the email again to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I have to apply for a visa, arrange travel, but they're helping with all of that. It's real. It's actually real. You need to tell Mom and Dad, he said. The joy drained out of me. I know. Do you want me to be there when you do? No, I said. I need to do this myself. I hung up and sat with the news for a while, letting it sink in. In 3 months, I would leave this house. In 3 months, I would start a new life in a new country where no one knew my history, where I could be whoever I wanted to be. In 3 months, I would be free. But first, I had to tell my father. The man who hadn't spoken to me in 6 weeks. The man who'd spent my entire life trying to break me. The man who'd told my mother I would fail and come crawling back. I had to tell him I was leaving, and I had to watch his face when he realized he'd lost. I waited until dinner time to tell them. Not because I wanted to share a meal with my father, we hadn't eaten together in 6 weeks, but because I wanted witnesses. I wanted my mother there. I wanted my younger brother there. I wanted people who would remember this moment, who could confirm later that it had really happened, that I hadn't imagined my father's reaction. I came downstairs at 7 p.m., the acceptance letter printed and folded in my pocket. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my hands were steady. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say, how I was going to stand, where I was going to look. I'd prepared for this like it was a performance, because in a way, it was. My mother was setting the table. My younger brother was already seated. And my father was in his usual chair at the head of the table, reading something on his phone, pretending the world consisted only of what he chose to acknowledge. I walked into the dining room and stood at the empty chair. My chair, the one that had sat vacant for 6 weeks while my father pretended I didn't exist. I have something to tell you, I said, my voice clear and strong. My mother froze, a plate halfway to the table. My brother looked up, his eyes wide. And my father continued staring at his phone, his face blank, as if I hadn't spoken at all. I've been accepted to a graduate program, I continued, speaking to the room even though I was looking directly at my father. A full scholarship for a master's degree in clinical psychology. In Europe, I leave in 3 months, my mother gasped. My brother broke into a huge grin. And my father finally looked at me. His face was a study in controlled rage. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. His eyes were hard and cold, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like fear. You're lying, he said. The first words he'd spoken to me in 6 weeks, and they were an accusation. I'm not, I said calmly. I pulled the acceptance letter from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. It's all there. Full scholarship. Everything paid for. I start in September. He snatched up the letter and read it, his face getting darker with each line. When he finished, he crumpled it in his fist. You're not going, he said flatly. Yes, I am. I won't allow it. I won't sign the papers. I won't give permission. I'm 21 years old, I said. I don't need your permission. I don't need your signature. I don't need anything from you. You need money, he shot back. You need someone to pay for your visa, your plane ticket, your expenses until the program starts. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. I have everything I need, I said. My brother is helping me with the visa fees. The scholarship covers my flight. And I've been saving every bit of money I can find. I don't need you. I haven't needed you for a long time. I just didn't realize it until you stopped pretending to be a father. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. Part of me almost wanted him to. It would be proof. Evidence, something I could point to and say, see, this is who he really is. But he didn't. He just stood there, shaking with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. After everything I've done for you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. After everything I've provided, every sacrifice I've made, this is how you repay me? By abandoning your family? By running away like a coward? You didn't sacrifice for me, I said. You provided the bare minimum required by law and society, and you used that provision as an excuse to abuse me. You hit me. You terrorized me. You made me want to die. And when I finally found the courage to tell the truth about what you did, you punished me by pretending I didn't exist. You're not a father. You're a tyrant who's losing control of his subject. How dare you? He started, but I cut him off. No, you don't get to talk anymore. You've had 21 years to talk, to explain, to apologize, to change. You chose silence instead. So now it's my turn to talk and you're going to listen. My mother was crying quietly. My brother was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And my father was frozen, his face purple with rage but his mouth closed, as if my words had actually silenced him. I'm leaving, I said. In 3 months, I'm getting on a plane and I'm never coming back. I'm going to study psychology so I can help other people escape situations like this. I'm going to build a life where I don't have to walk on eggshells or monitor every word or make myself small to avoid triggering someone's rage. I'm going to be happy. And you're going to have to live with the knowledge that you had a daughter who loved you despite everything, and you threw that away because your pride was more important than your child. You'll fail, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. You'll be back within a year begging for forgiveness. I won't, I said simply, because I'm not you. I don't give up when things get hard. I don't blame other people for my failures. I don't hurt the people who love me just to feel powerful. I'm better than you. I've always been better than you. And now I'm going to prove it. I turned to my mother. I love you. I wish you'd been strong enough to leave him, to protect us, to choose us over your comfort. But I understand why you didn't. I hope someday you find the courage to save yourself the way I'm saving myself. Then I turned to my younger brother. You don't have to stay here. You don't have to accept this as normal. There are other ways to live, other kinds of families. Don't let him break you the way he tried to break me. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the acceptance letter crumpled on the table, leaving my father standing there impotent and furious, leaving my old life behind. I went to my room and closed the door, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The next 3 months were a strange liminal period. I was still living in the house, still navigating the silence, but everything felt different now. I had an end date. I had a future that didn't include this place, or these people, or this pain. My father tried various tactics to stop me. First, he tried to convince me the scholarship was a scam, that I was being fooled, that I'd get to Europe and find out there was no program. When that didn't work, he tried to scare me, telling me horror stories about women who went abroad alone and ended up trafficked or assaulted or dead. When that didn't work, he tried guilt, talking about how I was abandoning my family, how my mother would be heartbroken, how I was being selfish. None of it worked. I'd made my decision and nothing he said could change it. My mother oscillated between support and sabotage. Some days she'd help me prepare, giving me advice about what to pack, sharing tips about living abroad. Other days she'd beg me not to go, telling me I was making a mistake, that I'd regret leaving, that family was more important than education or freedom or happiness. I understood her fear. She'd never left, never chosen herself, never imagined a life beyond this house and this man. My leaving was a mirror showing her all the choices she hadn't made, all the years she'd wasted staying in a situation that slowly killed her spirit. She wanted me to stay not because it was best for me, but because my staying would validate her choice to stay. But I couldn't sacrifice my future to make her feel better about her past. My brother, my half-brother, the one who'd helped me apply, became my lifeline during those months. He helped me navigate the visa process, which was complicated and bureaucratic, and would have been impossible without his help. He took me shopping for things I'd need, winter clothes for European weather, a good suitcase, a laptop for my studies. He gave me money for expenses, refusing to let me pay him back, telling me it was an investment in my future. When you're a famous psychologist, he said, you can dedicate your first book to me. Deal, I said, and we both laughed, but I meant it. Someday, when I'd healed enough to write about this, I would make sure everyone knew he'd saved me. My younger brother started talking to me again, really talking, not just awkward pleasantries. He told me about his own experiences with our father, the ways the abuse had shaped him, the fear he still carried. He asked me questions about therapy, about healing, about whether I thought he needed help too. Yes, I told him honestly, we all need help. What we went through wasn't normal, and it left marks on all of us. But help is available. Healing is possible. You don't have to carry this alone. He started seeing a therapist. I considered it a victory. The visa came through 6 weeks before my departure date. I held the passport with its fresh visa stamp and felt something shift inside me. This was real. This was actually happening. I was leaving. I started saying goodbye to people. Friends from university, relatives who'd supported me, the few teachers who'd made a difference in my life. Each goodbye felt significant, like I was closing chapters of a book I'd never read again. Some people were happy for me. Others were judgmental, telling me I was abandoning my family, that I should stay and work things out, that running away never solved anything. I stopped trying to explain. People who'd never lived in an abusive household couldn't understand why leaving was necessary, why staying would have killed me slowly. I just smiled and thanked them for their concern and moved on. 2 weeks before my departure, my father made one final attempt to stop me. He called a family meeting, the first time he'd acknowledged my existence in a group setting since the confrontation 3 months earlier. The whole family was there, my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles, even some cousins. My father had clearly told them his version of events because most of them looked at me with disapproval or pity. "I've called you all here," my father began, "because my daughter is making a terrible mistake. She's planning to leave the country, to abandon her family, to throw away everything we've built here. I'm hoping that if she hears from all of you, if she understands how much pain she's causing, she'll reconsider." He went around the room, and one by one, my relatives told me I was wrong. I was being selfish. I was breaking my mother's heart. I was destroying the family. I should stay, apologize, make peace, be grateful for everything my father had provided. I sat there and listened to all of it, my face calm, my hands folded in my lap. When they were done, when they'd all had their say, my father looked at me expectantly. "Well," he said, "do you have anything to say?" "Yes," I said. I stood up so I could look at all of them. "I want to thank you all for making this decision so easy. You've just proven that not one of you cares about my well-being, my happiness, or my truth. You care about maintaining appearances, about keeping the family together regardless of how toxic it is, about protecting an abuser, because it's more comfortable than holding him accountable." I looked at my father. "You beat me. You terrorized me. You made me want to kill myself. And when I survived and told the truth about what you did, you punished me by pretending I didn't exist. That's not love. That's not family. That's abuse." I looked at my mother. "You knew what he was doing and you did nothing. You chose your comfort over your children's safety. You're as responsible as he is." I looked at my relatives. "And all of you, sitting here telling me to stay in a situation that almost killed me, telling me to be grateful for abuse because it came with a roof over my head, you're complicit too. You're all part of a system that protects abusers and silences victims." I picked up my bag. "I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I'm going to build a life where I don't have to pretend anymore, where I don't have to make myself small, where I don't have to accept cruelty as love. And someday, when I've healed, I'm going to help other people escape situations like this. That's my purpose. That's my future. And none of you can stop me." I walked out of that meeting and never looked back. The day of my departure arrived faster than I expected. I'd packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. Not much to show for 21 years of life, but enough. Everything else I was leaving behind. The books I'd read as a child, the clothes that didn't fit anymore, the memories I didn't want to carry. My brother drove me to the airport. My mother came too, crying the whole way, alternating between telling me she was proud of me and begging me not to go. My father stayed home. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't acknowledge my leaving at all. It was perfect, really. His silence in my final moments in that house was the clearest proof of who he was, what he valued, how little I'd ever mattered to him beyond my usefulness as someone to control. At the airport, my mother hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Please be safe," she whispered. "Please be happy. Please don't forget us. I'll be safe," I promised. "I'll be happy. And I'll never forget, but I'm also never coming back." She sobbed harder, and I felt a pang of guilt. But I couldn't let guilt keep me trapped. I couldn't sacrifice my future to ease her pain about the past. My brother hugged me too. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it. I'm so proud of you. Thank you," I said. "For everything. For believing me. For helping me. For showing me that not everyone in this family is broken." "We're all a little broken," he said. "But you're going to heal. And maybe someday the rest of us will too." I went through security, turned back one last time to wave, and then walked toward my gate. Toward my future. Toward freedom. The flight was long, over 10 hours, and I spent most of it staring out the window, watching my old life disappear beneath clouds and distance. I thought about everything I was leaving behind. The house where I'd grown up, the city I'd known my whole life, the family that had shaped me in ways both terrible and profound. But I also thought about everything I was moving toward. A new country, a new language to master, new people who would know me only as I chose to present myself. A chance to build a life from scratch, to become someone who wasn't defined by trauma and survival. When the plane landed, I stepped out into a European autumn, the air crisp and clean and full of possibility. I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The university had arranged housing for me. A small studio apartment near campus, nothing fancy but mine. All mine. A space where I could close the door and know I was safe. Where no one would hurt me or erase me or make me feel like I didn't deserve to exist. I unpacked my suitcases, hung up my clothes, arranged my books on the shelf. I made the bed with sheets I'd bought myself, set up my laptop on the desk, put a photo of my brother on the nightstand, the only family photo I'd brought. Then I sat on my bed in my apartment in my new city in my new country, and I cried. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Grief and relief and joy all mixed together. I'd made it. I'd actually made it. I was free. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this now from my apartment, taking a break from studying for midterms. The program is challenging, harder than anything I've done before, but I'm thriving. I'm learning about trauma and resilience and the neuroscience of abuse. I'm learning how to help people heal from the kinds of wounds I carry. I'm also learning how to heal myself. I found a therapist here, a kind woman who specializes in family trauma and complex PTSD. We meet twice a week, and slowly, painfully, I'm unpacking everything I carried with me from that house. The fear, the shame, the belief that I was somehow responsible for my father's abuse, the guilt about leaving my mother, the anger that still burns hot and bright when I think about all the years I lost to their dysfunction. It's hard work. Some days I feel like I'm making progress. Other days I feel like I'm drowning in memories and triggers and the weight of everything I survived. But I keep showing up. I keep doing the work. Because I didn't escape just to stay broken. I've made friends here. Other students in my program, people from different countries and cultures, people who are also studying psychology because they want to understand and heal from their own pain. We have a study group that meets twice a week. And sometimes after studying, we just talk, sharing our stories, supporting each other. They know about my father. Not all the details, but enough. And they don't judge me for leaving. They don't tell me I should forgive him or reconcile with my family. They just listen and validate and remind me that I deserve to be happy. I haven't spoken to my father since I left. He hasn't tried to contact me, and I haven't reached out to him. The silence between us is permanent now, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's just empty. A space where a relationship should have been but never really was. My mother calls sometimes. The conversations are awkward and painful, full of things we can't say and questions we can't ask. She tells me about life at home, about my siblings, about the weather. She never mentions my father, and I never ask. We're both pretending that the elephant in the room doesn't exist, that we can have some kind of relationship without addressing the fundamental betrayal that sits between us. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her. I don't know if forgiveness is even the right goal. Maybe the best I can hope for is understanding, accepting that she did the best she could with the tools she had, even if her best wasn't good enough to protect me. My brother, my half-brother, my savior, we talk regularly. He's proud of me, he says. He tells me about his life, his family, his own journey toward healing. He's started setting boundaries with our father, standing up for himself in ways he never could before. He says watching me leave gave him permission to imagine a different kind of relationship with our father, one where he doesn't have to accept abuse as the price of family. My younger brother is doing better too. He's in therapy, working through his own trauma, starting to build a life that isn't defined by fear. He's talking about maybe studying abroad too, following my path to freedom. I hope he does. I hope all my siblings eventually find their way out. As for me, I'm building a life I never imagined possible. I'm excelling in my program. I'm making friends. I'm exploring a new city, learning a new language, discovering who I am when I'm not constantly in survival mode. I'm also writing. I started keeping a journal, documenting my healing journey, processing my trauma through words. My therapist says it's healthy, that writing can be a powerful tool for integration and meaning-making. Someday, maybe I'll turn these journals into something more, a book perhaps, or a research project. Something that might help other people who are living in the kind of silence I escaped. Something that might give them hope that escape is possible, that healing is real, that you can survive the unsurvivable and come out the other side. But for now, I'm just focused on today, on getting through my classes, on showing up for therapy, on building friendships and routines and a life that feels stable and safe. I'm learning that healing isn't linear. Some days I feel strong and capable and proud of how far I've come. Other days I'm triggered by something small, a raised voice, a slammed door, a man who looks like my father, and I'm right back in that house, feeling small and scared and powerless. But even on the bad days, I know I made the right choice. Even when I'm struggling, I'm grateful to be struggling here, in my own apartment, in my own life, rather than back in that house pretending everything was fine. I'm free. And freedom, I'm learning, isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of choice. It's waking up every morning and deciding who I want to be, how I want to live, what I'm willing to accept, and what I'm not. It's knowing that I never have to go back to that silence, that erasure, that slow death of the spirit. It's knowing that I survived, and that survival was just the beginning. Last week, I got an email from my younger brother. He'd been accepted to a study abroad program. He's leaving in 3 months? You showed me it was possible, he wrote. You showed me that we don't have to accept the life we were given. We can build something better. I cried when I read that. Happy tears, proud tears, hopeful tears. One by one, we're escaping. One by one, we're breaking the cycle. One by one, we're choosing ourselves over the family system that tried to break us. My father is losing his power. His children are leaving. His control is slipping. His silence is no longer a weapon we fear. He's just a man now. A broken, angry man who hurt the people who loved him and is now facing the consequences. I don't hate him anymore. I don't wish him dead. I just don't think about him much. He's becoming irrelevant to my life, a character in a story I'm no longer living. And that, I think, is the truest form of freedom. I'm 22 years old. I'm studying psychology in Europe. I'm healing from trauma. I'm building a life I'm proud of. I'm helping other people escape situations like the one I survived. I'm not defined by what was done to me. I'm defined by what I chose to do next. I chose to speak. I chose to leave. I chose to heal. I chose myself. And I would make that choice again, every single time. To anyone reading this who's living in silence, who's trapped in an abusive situation, who's been told that speaking up will destroy your family is already destroyed. The abuse destroyed it. You're just naming what already exists. And naming it is the first step toward freedom. Speak your truth. Document your reality. Build your escape plan. And when you're ready, when you've gathered your strength and your resources and your courage, leave. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be happy. You deserve a life that doesn't require you to make yourself small. You deserve to exist loudly, fully, unapologetically. And the silence that tried to erase you, it doesn't get the last word. You do.